So as a massive X-Men fan, I just have to say, X-Men 97 is just pure perfection. It totally delivered. And I feel like it is everything that you would have wanted it to be, and then some. And I feel like it was done and crafted in such a good way, as they have taken everything from the 90s animated series that you feel really familiar with, and just made it so much darker, so much edgier, so much more adult. So I feel like that audience that fell in love with the animated series back in the 90s are not only able to recapture the magic, but are the perfect people that are going to enjoy this series. And as far as the world is concerned, in terms of everybody feeling even more fractured than the 90s, I feel like the X-Men was always so ahead of its time, and actually predicted a lot of the singling out that then took place in such an unbelievable way that actually, if anything, I feel like the X-Men are even more identifiable by so many people, as I feel like so many minority groups are able to see themselves in the X-Men. But not only that, anybody that has ever felt singled out, I feel like can definitely identify themselves with the X-Men. And then you layer on top of that the fact that these mutants have superpowers is just unbelievable. And I feel like all of the storytelling from like a dramatic soap opera perspective, along with the fact that there are so many unbelievable action sequences and so many heartbreaking moments. Honestly, the X-Men as a group are just so brilliant. And then you apply all of the brilliant writing that X-Men 97 had. The end result is just pure perfection. But the thing that I loved is that they didn't make it easy for themselves. As maybe in the 90s animated series, you could say it's a little bit black and white in terms of who is good and who is bad. Whereas this time, I feel like it is so much more intelligent than that, as you can literally see firstly shades of grey between all of the different particular groups, and also you can see where every single individual group is coming from, which from a storytelling perspective is just so beyond intelligent, as not only is it really, really layered, but it is just so deep as you're able to, like I said, see it from all of the different characters' perspectives. Of course, you yourself will have your own perspective in terms of who you actually are siding with, but I just think it's so brilliantly done. And I actually rewatched all 70 episodes of the original 90s animated run in order to get myself ready for X-Men 97, and even though it did take a while, it was absolutely the right decision, as I was able to just enjoy myself so much more with X-Men 97, as everything was so fresh in terms of all of the experiences and storylines that these individual characters have just gone through, and all of the little references that they make to their experiences from the wider series is just so brilliantly linked. And there are just so many powerful one-liners from all of these different characters, and because of the fact that you've been with them for so many episodes across the previous 5-season run, you just feel like you know them so well. So when they do have these unbelievable mic drop moments, it's just so much more impactful. So for example, like Cyclops, when he is referencing in a humorous way the fact that, you know, in this other incarnation they wore black leather, and for example Storm really viewing herself as Jean's sister, and the mind and the weather line that they had, and then of course Val's line of saying Magneto was right, absolutely unbelievable, and Gambit's line of remember it when he said it as his final words, so heartbreaking. Magneto when he's trying to tell Leech that everything will be okay. Oh my goodness, this show honestly was just packing such an almighty punch. So let's run through all of the main storyline beats that X-Men 97 had. So first of all, I thought it was really clever that Roberto is now in the Jubilee's character's seat in terms of experiencing everything for the first time with this X-Men group, with all of the Sentinels after them. So I feel like they threw back to the first episode in a really good way. And I love the fact that by the end of this episode, you're seeing that Magneto is now going to be the leader of the X-Men and the little conflict that they have. But I thought it was resolved relatively quickly. I mean, everything in this show just moves really, really quickly, doesn't it? And then we have Magneto's trial, the Executioner destroying and depowering Storm, I thought was just so shocking, as of course this character is just maybe the most powerful out of all of them, and the Sentinels even called her an Omega threat, which I thought was a really nice nod to her being an Omega level mutant. And then her storyline arc of refining her power within herself I thought was really, really powerful, and I thought it was really foreshadowing that she was saying, you know, what does it feel like actually to be fully human, and then she is feeling this, and then she's really missing her mutant powers. So I feel like that storyline arc with Storm was really, really good. And then if anything, she is now very similar to the Phoenix Force, literally risen from the dead and is now even more powerful than ever. Speaking of Phoenix, I thought Madeline Pryor, that storyline was so good. I mean, all of these, of course, are lifted and shifted from the comic book material, but I feel like the way in which X-Men 97 explores those storylines is done in such a good way, and I thought Madeline Pryor was such a tragic character. I mean, firstly, Mr. Sinister, gosh, he is just beyond evil, but the fact that he cloned Jean, and then Madeline was kind of created unintentionally, but now now is just trying to navigate herself within her life. I actually thought that we would never really see her again after she left, but I thought it was really interesting that she is now part of the Genosha panel group. It would have been good to have explored more storylines with this character, but unfortunately she was going to die, but she did say one final goodbye to Cable. And I thought it was interesting, Cable actually views Madeline as his biological mother, so I thought the tension between him and Jean was an interesting thing to explore. I never liked Mojo in the original series, and I still didn't like him here. I thought we would have just gotten rid of this character in its entirety, as I feel like he just drags the series down so badly. I know some people like him, but I just feel like he's such an awful character. And even though it was nice the old Jubilee actress was passing the torch onto the new voice actress, I just think overall the Mojo episode was just unfortunately really, really poor. But the Genosha genocide, my god, was that powerful. It was just absolutely making everybody that watched it just go into complete shock and in complete silence. And I just feel like by the end of this episode, you're just so numb. And I just feel like, you know, purposefully they made it into a little bit of a mid-season finale. And I feel like from that perspective, they just did such a good job, especially from a storytelling perspective, as the mutants are feeling like, you know, they finally had everything they have ever wanted. Genosha is going to be recognized by the UN nations. It seems as if, you know, the hatred towards them is dying down. They're having their own space. They're in a very celebratory mindset. Everybody is there. It is just so positive all around. And then suddenly these super sentinels are just burning and destroying everybody. Like I said, it was just so heartbreaking. And on top of that, Rogue, the character that everybody fell in love with in the original series, is now exploring a romantic relationship with both Gambit and Magneto. And she thinks that she has lost both of them by the end of this episode. So like I said, on so many different levels and so many different counts, that Genosha episode will honestly go down as one of the best episodes ever made. And like I said, it just left everybody in so much shock, and everybody was just talking about it non-stop on social media. Very similar to the Red Wedding series from Game of Thrones. And even though Mr. Sinister definitely could have been the big bad on his own, I thought it was unbelievably shocking to give him a superior. And Bastian was the person that was the real big bad all along. And I feel like Theo James just brought that villain to life so well. And he is just a true destructive force, pretty much killing and wiping out mutants left, right, and center. And he is able to use machinery in a way that it seemed as if he is going to be unstoppable and nobody is going to get the better of Bastian. But what they did by the end of this series in terms of how they ultimately were able to defeat him, I thought was just so clever. And they were just not able to change Genosha at all. And I think it was really clever how they leaned into the MCU mythology and terminology in terms of calling it an absolute point. So even though Cable had tried 200 times to stop all of the Genosha genocide from taking place, he just was not able to do so. So they have to try to deal with everything without using time travel. I thought Xavier's return was really, really good. Everybody was thinking that he's dead, but if you watch the final episode of season 5 in the original run, then you know that he's gone with Lilandra to the Shi'ar Empire world to hopefully get recovered and is now exploring a romantic relationship over there. I feel like they could have explored a little bit more about what is happening in space, but I feel like they were mainly obviously wanting to focus on bringing Xavier back. And I thought it was really, really clever how he was almost going to stay there, but his burning love and passion for the X-Men is ultimately what brought him back. And just the Prime Sentinels, the way in which Bastian was even created in terms of being the child of both a human and a Sentinel, I thought was actually quite clever. And then of course we returned back to Asteroid M, and then all of the things that took place in Asteroid M was unbelievable in terms of all of the different alliances. I feel like it worked with the Inner Circle from The Gifted. If anyone's watched The Gifted, honestly, one of my favourite TV shows ever made. As firstly, like I said, I'm just obsessed with the X-Men, and it's just so X-Men inspired, and all of the things in terms of different groups, in terms of the people that are trying to continue Xavier's dream, and the Inner Circle, and both of them are so super powered, and just the conflict that then takes place in a bit of a Civil War way, with all of these different characters fighting each other, is just done in such a cool way over here. And then of course we get to see Magneto and Professor X, the two legendary characters that we've seen in a number of different iterations having such a good friendship, and you can really see where Magneto in particular is coming from, especially given all of the negative experiences that he's had to go through in his life, which is why his mind is just constantly flooded with negativity. But then Xavier is always just trying to have this hope and dream of acceptance and coexistence, and you can, like I said, literally see it from all of the different characters' perspectives in such a good way, especially given all of the life experiences that all of the individuals have gone through. And then speaking of Magneto, the fact that he unceremoniously rips Wolverine apart because of course he's made of adamantium, I just honestly thought that moment was just so shocking. I know, of course, it's mirroring what happened in the comic books, but it was just so heartbreaking, especially as firstly Wolverine is just such a fan favourite, and towards the latter end of the animated series, it was so Wolverine heavy. Whereas this time, I feel like it was the right decision to focus on all of the other different characters. But the one time that you do focus on Wolverine, he's getting ripped apart, so it was pretty shocking. And I loved it that Sinister and Jean obviously have got a bit of tension between them two, because he's pretty much kidnapped Jean and then cloned Jean and pretty much destroyed and ruined her life. Even though she's got the memories of Madelyne Pryor, those weren't her experiences. So Mr. Sinister really did screw her over, but I loved it. When you do actually think that he's pretty much defeated her, she was then able to rise from the ashes as the Phoenix and then ultimately defeat Sinister. Speaking of the animated series, Sinister always had a really cool group with him that had wicked powers, but we didn't see any of them, so I wonder where they are, and I'm hoping, of course, Sinister will be back. I wonder when he does come back if he gets his group back as well. And then by the end of this series, of course, the X-Men are now split across different timelines, so in the past, the present, and the future, and now Forge and potentially Bishop are now going to try to reunite them, which I think will be really, really clever, and I'm hopeful that the second season does actually explore these different timelines in a really cool way, as Apocalypse is now going to be the big bad in all three timelines. So the majority of the X-Men are now thrown back into the past, so they'll be with El Sabah Nur, who was the first ever mutant apparently, and so maybe we'll get to see his proper origin storyline of how he became the evil, magnificent Apocalypse character. Of course, in the present, we saw that he took over Cortex's body in his final appearance in the animated series. He kind of used Cortex as a bit of a vessel / sacrifice, and now is back in the present day and is of course potentially going to bring back Gambit as his fifth horseman Death. And then in the future, we also got to see from the original animated series run, the fact that Cable just hates Apocalypse and he just wants to wipe this guy out once and for all. And so even though Jean and Scott Summers are going to be able to raise Cable from a young age, which I think is absolutely lovely and actually did happen in the comic books, of course Apocalypse will potentially be a bit of a figurehead over there as well. So I love it that we're potentially going to have Apocalypse across 3 different timelines. Apocalypse is no stranger to multiple timelines, as there was a bit of a multiversal episode where he was able to outsmart Cable and was able to steal his time-traveling technology and was then potentially living outside of time. We saw a presence of Kang the Conqueror's variant Immortus over there too, so I cannot wait to see what's going to happen in season 2. So there are so many brilliant, outstanding, awesome characters in X-Men 97, so let's go through every single one of them now, one by one. So first up, we have to start with Cyclops / Scott Summers. I love this character. I feel like he is so brilliantly written, and I feel like as the leader of the team, there is so much this character has to go through, and I feel like finally you really get to see the burden of being a leader, and the mindset that Scott has is just so good. I feel like in the original run, he was a cool leader, but I feel like there was so much more focus and preference on other characters, for example Wolverine, who's being a bit of a rebellious character. But this time, I feel like Scott really is able to show what a wicked character he really is. And you could really feel it when he was speaking to Professor X and was like, why didn't you give me the leadership role of this team? And you could see where Professor X was coming from in terms of he didn't want to give him that burden, as Scott had just given so much to this team, and so he wanted to give it to Magneto. And so the tension that you can also see from Cyclops and Magneto's perspective was done really, really well. But then, finally, Scott was able to take a little bit of a backseat and was allowing Magneto to be the true figurehead, as Magneto was so much more involved than Professor X ever was across the entire run. So I feel like all of that was done really, really well. And then we have all of the father relationships being explored, as of course Scott was raised as an orphan, which you also got to see in the original run, which was so emotional. And so he's always seen Professor X as a bit of a father. And then I loved it, all of the sequences between him and Nathan, as he never wanted to repeat all of his father's mistakes. But in order for Cable to survive, given the disease that Sinister had given him, he needed to sacrifice him. So I just feel like all of those moments were just so heartbreaking. And then, of course, on top of all of that, he's got this triangle with Jean Grey and Madelyne Pryor. And I thought it was so cool, as of course his allegiances do lie with Jean. And at one point, he was dismissing Madelyne because he kind of saw Jean as the original one that he fell in love with. But then he continued having a relationship with Madelyne Pryor in the astral plane, as of course ultimately she was the one that he has been with most recently, and of course is the mother of his child. So like I said, I feel like Scott is just such a brilliantly layered character. Speaking of Jean Grey, you can see things from both Jean's perspective as well as Madelyne's perspective, which is a true testament to the writing, as they could very easily just make Jean the character that the audience cares about, but actually we've been with Madeleine for quite a number of episodes, and maybe certain episodes in the animated series as well, as you never really know when Sinister actually kidnapped Jean and switched the two of them. And you can really see what a powerhouse Jean Grey is, as her telekinesis and all of her mind control abilities are just so good. For example, she is able to stop a falling building even without all of the Phoenix powers, so Jean really is a powerhouse, and I really liked her relationship also with Storm, as you can really see their sisterly bond, so much more so than you ever did see in the original animated run. And then speaking of Storm, everybody always says that she is such an overpowered Omega level mutant, and then the fact that she loses these powers is just so shocking. But like I said earlier, I love the storyline that this then leads to, in terms of, you really sometimes do need to dig deep inside of yourself to find your inner strength and your inner power, and then when you bring that out, you'll be more stronger than you ever were before. Unfortunately, Wolverine was super sidelined this season. He was such a big character, like I said, in the original 5-season run, especially in the final couple of seasons. And of course, Hugh Jackman just really brought this character to life in live action. So it's understandable to focus on other characters, especially as the third animated series run was all about Wolverine and the X-Men. So, he's not larger than the X-Men, he's part of the X-Men. And I feel like this show definitely did show that, but I feel like they could have given him a little bit more to do other than Magneto just totally ripping him apart right at the end. But one thing that he hasn't lost is the fact that he is such a hot-headed guy, and I thought they could have explored the fact that he is so happy having Morph back. I mean, I know there's been some time between the end of the original animated run and this season, but they could have explored that, as he was throughout the entire run just wanting Morph to come back to the team so badly. And now that he is part of the team, I feel like he's taking him for a little bit for granted, which maybe is another storyline that they could explore in the future. But speaking of Morph, I feel like he is the cameo guy. He was just playing so many different characters with his powers, which I thought was really, really nice in terms of playing Archangel, playing Mr. Fantastic, playing Hulk, playing so many different characters and able to use all of their powers too. And of course, he was abused by Sinister because Sinister made him evil and was up against the X-Men on a number of different occasions. So even though there were a couple of moments where they had Sinister talking about this and referencing it with Morph, I feel like they could have explored all of that abuse a little bit more. I know that Jubilee was introduced originally in the 90s as being the eyes and ears for a younger audience, but I know, and I was actually one of them, in terms of being people that just wanted to focus on the X-Men and not always Jubilee's perspective of the X-Men, which led to her role being reduced, and then you actually did focus on the X-Men for being the X-Men. I feel like they learned from that and they made her a little less annoying, and now she is being a bit of a coach to newer X-Men. I'm sure she will be for other characters as well, but focusing mainly on Roberto and just helping him understand his mutant powers and how he should feel good about himself because of the fact that he is a mutant. So I feel like from that perspective it was really good, and I feel like she will hopefully become a bigger and more layered character in the future. Magneto was honestly absolutely exceptional. I feel like every single episode that had Magneto in it was just pure gold, as he was just firstly such a brilliantly written character. And then I feel like his powers are just unstoppable. I mean, speak of an Omega level mutant. This character was just so powerful. And I just feel like his arc alone is just so good in terms of firstly just wanting to realize Xavier's dream, feeling really sad over the fact that he's lost his best friend. And then when Xavier gives him his pride and joy, the X-Men, he just wants to handle it with such care. And so actually is wanting to make his dream a reality. And he actually does make it a reality. But then, when you see all of the horrific things that take place in Genosha, you can literally feel his and your heart breaking for this. And then his reaction to all of this was just unbelievable in terms of not only returning back to the character that he used to be, but just being 10 times bigger than that, 10 times more furious than that, 10 times more rageful than that. It was just unbelievable. Like I said, Magneto was such a phenomenal character in the first season. I mean, Professor X was good, but not at the same level as Magneto. Like I said, it was interesting to see what happened after he went with Lilandra to space. She kind of recovered him, made him really happy once again, and almost was going to wipe his entire memory of his life on Earth. But then he just wasn't able to let go of his pride and joy of the X-Men. And then this ultimately is what sent him back down to Earth. And all of the different interactions that he had, for example, with Beast, with Magneto, with Cyclops, was really, really good. And I just loved it that ultimately he was able to save Eric and was able to make Magneto return back to normal. I love Beast's intelligence. I feel like he's such a clever guy. And I loved it that Nightcrawler was a true main character this time. I feel like his power set is just so cool. And you could really feel and experience his power set in a really cool way. And speaking of blue characters, I'm so surprised that Mystique was nowhere to be seen in this season. And Bastion truly was evil incarnate. I feel like he was the epitome of an awful person that is just willing and happy to wipe out so many different characters and just has no remorse for it whatsoever. And I feel like from a storytelling perspective, this character was written so well. So firstly, he's been brought up to feel like mutants need to be wiped out and destroyed and defeated, and views himself as being more superior to them. And I think it's interesting as from a writing perspective, they wanted mutants to feel like humans did do in the first season, in terms of a new generation are now potentially wiping them out. And because he's so technologically advanced and linked, he was able to see the video footage of Xavier potentially relinquishing his X-Men and was able to use this and get the media to hate and turn on the mutants. So he is just so advanced, and you can really see how dark governmental potential figures and businesses and loads of other people potentially twist the reality to make the public have a perception of things that actually are not true. Gambit was such a fan favorite in the original run. I feel like they could have explored a few more storylines with this guy, considering how cool he actually is. But if anything, he was just part of the love triangle between him, Rogue, and Magneto. But his final words are so immortalized because of his tragic death. But speaking of death, he will of course return in the next season as one of Apocalypse's horsemen. And then speaking of Rogue, she is such a powerhouse, and you could literally feel all of her emotions. Firstly, the love tension that she was having with Magneto and Gambit. And then when she ultimately loses Gambit and she can't feel him anymore, and then this then leads her to go onto Magneto's potential side. Honestly, all of that stuff was just done so well. And then when she is just wanting to potentially kill Trask, and she is just destroying all of these Sentinels, all of the Rogue-based storylines were just done in such a good way. It was nice to have a couple of appearances from Emma Frost. I just cannot wait to hopefully see more of this, but also see more of the Inner Circle. It's just such a shame that we only really got to see the Inner Circle in 1 or 2 episodes in the original 5-season run, as the Inner Circle are just such cool characters. And like I said, The Gifted, the live action series, just brought the Inner Circle to life in such a cool way that they are just really people not to be messed with. And I'm hopeful that we get to see a lot more of them in the future, as the Hellfire Club are just such cool characters. And I'm hopeful that we also get to see a lot more of Polaris, as she is also a daughter of Magneto, and I feel like her, Wanda, and Pietro need to have more scenes together. I would just love it if these 4 just got together one day, especially as you do get to see it in Magneto's mind. So hopefully, potentially, we'll get to see it in the future. And then speaking of mutant families, I feel like the Summers family need to get together too, especially as Cyclops has 2 other brothers. Havoc we've already seen, and Vulcan, we got to see a couple of different cameo appearances of this guy, and then of course his father, and then Cable in there as well as Jean. So I feel like all of these summer characters need to come together as well. And then hopefully we get to see a lot more cameos in terms of the wider Marvel world within this particular universe, as we got to see Captain America, Iron Man, Daredevil, Spider-Man, all of them. Hopefully we get to see potentially this universe being recreated. Then speaking of live action, hopefully we'll get an X-Men movie. Potentially it's going to be released soon. Whether it's before or after Secret Wars, who knows yet, but I feel like that could be very, very exciting. But in terms of live action, we have seen a couple of mutant appearances in the MCU already. For example, a written report about somebody with claws in a bar, obviously going to be Wolverine. We've got Kamala Khan as the first mutant in this MCU world. Maybe Rogue is going to steal the powers from Captain Marvel like she did do in the original animated one. And then we've of course got the powerhouse Wanda in her as well. So I kind of wait to see what they're going to continue with in the live action space, and then potentially also in the future of X-Men 97 in season 2 and in season 3. But overall, I loved the first season of X-Men 97. Not the Mojo episode, but outside of that, there were just so many gripping and unbelievable moments, both from a soap opera perspective as well as from an action perspective. And just the writing alone is just done in such a good way. I just loved every single minute of X-Men 97. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give it a mega 9 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of season 1 of X-Men 97? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.